to Daybreak. My name is Waihiga, and I must be honest, when I first arrived at this particular location, that scene behind me was reminiscent of a war zone. But it's not. We are at the South End Mall, and of course the demolition process as part of the Nairobi regeneration exercise began here yesterday. It's been a discussion for the last 3 years or so about what should happen to this particular property, and yesterday that interagency task force decided to move in with their bulldozers. And what you're seeing behind me is the result. To understand a little bit about this whole process of reclaiming Nairobi River and so much more, I'm joined by two guests. Let me begin with my guest on my right here. We have Constant Cap, who is an urban planner. Welcome to the program. And on the other side, we have Gad Opio, who's the Vice President of the Architectural Association of Kenya. Welcome to the program as well.
Thank you, Maura.
Just a quick update. We've spoken to the OCPD, who's sort of manning the security operation here, and he's indicated that the operation will continue today. They really dealt with this building right here behind me yesterday, and it's really taken quite the brunt of that demolition. But there's another building. We'll try and get you pictures of that a bit later on. They began working on it, but it's still not fully complete, and they say they will carry on with the demolitions today. But Cap, let me begin with you. A lot of uproar for the last 3 years or so. In your personal opinion, why now?
When we look at the last 3 years, we have to realize that last year was a very political year, and some of these decisions may have led to people taking sides politically. So we have to take that into consideration. Moving into this year, we can call a spade a spade. We have a new government in the city. We have a head of state on his second term, what is being called legacy term.
There are some who say we have a handshake.
We have a handshake as well. So things in the surrounding atmosphere have taken a bit of a turn. At the same time, there has also been an outcry from Kenyans. There has been an outcry. We've seen in Kileleshwa lots of residents complaining about the stench in the river. We have seen even here in Madaraka people complaining about floods in Parklands, Nairobi West, complaining about flooding due to these riparian areas. On top of that, we have the task force that was formed earlier this year, which was the Nairobi Regeneration Committee, that is looking at various sectors, including transportation, physical planning, and a number of other areas. And one critical area that was mentioned to me was the restoration of Nairobi River.
And they're taking that very strongly. Gad, come in as well. Give me your thoughts as to why you think now is the time for the sort of exercises we've been seeing around the city.
Okay, what has happened is unfortunate. As I speak on behalf of our president, Architect Nema, and I also speak on behalf of the entire fraternity of professionals in the built environment. What I can say is that the government must put its house in order. The officers who approve buildings on riparian reserves should be held accountable.
And let me interrupt you there. That's an interesting point you've raised. I had a chat with the Nema Director General 2 days ago on this same show, and he said that they give licenses with conditions. And one of the conditions is they have no problem with you sort of building near a river as long as you don't get within that, whether it's a 6-meter mark or so forth. So they only come in when you have breached part of those conditions. Do you buy into that particular argument?
Okay, I don't really buy into that argument, because what I would say is that anyone claiming ignorance on this is actually a liar.
Okay.
Yeah, everyone.
That's a strong point.
Should bear. I mean, each one of us must be ready to carry their cross, and that goes on the same note. You'll think of the developer and even the professionals who are involved.
And by professionals, some of them are architects, of which you oversee, and
yes,
engineers.
Yes.
Okay, I'll come back to you a bit later on to find out what professional societies like yours can do to make sure sort of members are towing the line. But Costa, let me come back to you. There were tenants who had sort of, maybe some may even have moved in this month. Let's talk about the human cost of these evictions. Yesterday we saw tears here, we saw complaints. Can we really run away from that discussion?
We cannot run away from it. We've seen it also, that topic coming up with demolition of informal settlements, informal shops and such. But it is important that at the end of the day now we start getting open with our planning and our land use allocation. Unfortunately for this case, we've seen press reports about the building over the last almost 4 years, 3-4 years, and therefore ignorance may not be put up as an excuse.
Although we know the owner had also moved to court, that
Yeah.
is what he's saying is his defense. But carry
But
on.
at the end, because at the end of the day, some of these guidelines, regulations exist for the benefit of those tenants. Because when you put a building on a riparian reserve and we get heavy rains and your shop is flooded, who suffers the loss? It is you. Therefore, we have to look at it from the point of view that the law does not exist for its own sake. It actually exists for the benefit of the customer, for the benefit of the tenant, for the benefit of the building owner. Therefore, we go back to what the vice president of AK has said. We have to ask ourselves, where are the professionals when it comes to this? Are they guiding people in an essential manner? Are they giving people the correct advice? Because we can't have a situation where entire households have to move houses, entire businesses have to move themselves because some architect or some planner somewhere gave wrong advice to an investor in the name of making a quick buck. Therefore, we have to look at it holistically, and questions have to be asked about those particular people.
Let me come back to Gad Opio. Bwana Opio, talking about insurance, because that's a discussion that's now coming up. How does the insurance sector, in your personal experience, view demolitions, especially on properties that they have insured?
Okay, I've not had any personal experience with insurance as far as demolitions are concerned. But what I know, insurances are based on law. So many times when what you're doing is a transgression of the law, maybe you will not be compensated. But also you must read the dotted lines. If you had an agreement where you are covered for such instances, then of course you'll get compensation.
Which is also, however, very rare, I feel.
That will be very rare.
Okay.
Yes, because if it was an illegality, there's no way you're going to formalize it through insurance.
What sort of protection would you say the government offers tenants in a place like this one, if any?
Yes, our stand is that there should be a human face to the whole process of demolitions, because you realize as a result of the actions of various people in that whole chain, they're actually innocent losers in this process. Some of them are tenants, investors, traders, who may not have anything to do with the development process. So such people should be compensated in a way by the government.
Okay. That may be dicey because there are those who say that it's upon every Kenyan to do their own due diligence. How would you respond to those who are of that opinion?
Yes, if you talk to some of them, they'll tell you they actually did due diligence. All the papers were in place, signed and properly done. So for such a person, at the face value, you could have made a wrong decision. In other jurisdictions, what they have done is they actually penalize the developer, and from that penalty the victims are compensated.
Okay. I want to move that discussion forward. And Constant, he's raised some interesting points which I now want to bring your way. I get the feeling that every Kenyan must now educate themselves to a particular level, especially when they want to get into business. What do you think the average Kenyan should know about properties and the law? And now that we're talking about riparian sort of reserves, we haven't even talked about road reserves, which maybe is a whole discussion together. What do you think the average person who's watching this program today should be aware of?
No, it's very interesting because I was with some county officers recently, and one of the things we discussed was that we need more awareness on matters of physical planning and matters of land allocation. And we were actually discussing the possibility of even having what we call planning clinics or activations around the city, where we tell people, this is what the law requires, this is what is required for riparian, for road reserve, and the likes. We've probably seen it on social media now that we've got lots of laws covering riparian areas, but what takes precedence is the EMCA Act that gives it a minimum of 6 meters. Environmental Management and Coordination Act, which is the act in 1999 that gave rise to Nema, and it's it defines it through its rules and regulations that the riparian reserve covers a minimum of 6 meters and a maximum of 30 meters for rivers. And the basic calculation is multiplying the width of the river from the high water mark by 2.
Okay, so if a river is 3 meters,
yeah, comfortably 6 because it's minimum. If
Roughly
it's 5
6
meters, it would be 10 meters. Then beyond 15 meters, you stick to 30 meters. For rivers, for lakes, dams and oceans, that extends to about 100 meters from the tree line. For obvious reasons, for flooding, erosion and the likes. So that is kind of like putting the riparian law in a summary. From another angle, I think it is also important that the local authorities now start being more open and with planning guidelines, even to a point of producing spatial plans, basically maps of land use allocation and what is required on
and maps that are easily accessible to everyone.
Easily accessible, easy to understand. If we had a map of Madaraka, for instance, and it said this area is high density 4-story, this area is riparian reserve, this area is Madaraka Primary School, All Saints Primary School, and here we've got Mbagathi Way, here you can construct, here you can. This, even the residents would be able to come out and
you say as an urban planner you don't have that information at your at your fingertips.
I have to look for it. I have to go to the survey of Kenya. You can imagine.
What about me? God, coming back to you, and we talked about the human value or the human face of this particular what we are seeing behind us. What, and I'm talking about Nema strategy, what would have been the harm if Nema told tenants the night before, tomorrow at 6 a.m. and I know Nema's worry is people will move to court. So they drop a notice here at 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. Know that tomorrow by 6 a.m. we're going to clear this place. I can imagine tenants will come overnight and remove everything. What would be the harm in doing that?
Okay, there would be no harm, but we need to accept that we also have our peculiar ways as Kenyans.
As Kenyans.
Yes, and the byword is impunity. And what has happened before, people are actually given notices, they are forewarned, and they stubbornly stay on. You've seen buildings collapsing with people in them. People have been given notices, that's even right. Big X put on the wall. So how do you explain that phenomena? So in a way, we also are responsible for the outcomes that we get, because we are not compliant with the law. We are a society that do not want to obey the law. But you see, law and order is a must if we are to live in a civilized society. So it means everyone must play their role towards that end.
Okay. I want to read you a couple of tweets because obviously this has raised a lot of reactions on social media. I'm going to read one from Na Kenya party leader, former presidential candidate, former gubernatorial candidate as well, although her matter is in court, Martha Karua. She tweeted, waiting for people to build to completion on riparian land, then watching as innocent third parties buy or lease the properties only to come in and demolish, causing untold loss and suffering is unacceptable morally and legally. And she's tagged the Kenya Human Rights Commission, Haki, KNCHR, Amnesty Kenya, Law Society of Kenya as well. I don't know why she's not tagged Architectural Association of Kenya as well. Your take on her tweet?
Okay, many times many people overlook AK,
but you are there.
It must be a note.
Yes.
That we are still the largest association of built environment professionals. So anything built environment, AK should be the first point of call.
She's talked about morals.
Her point, I mean, the situation we're dealing with here has nothing to do with morality. In fact, you merely talk of the first sin. So if you want to talk of morality, to me, what we should be talking about is impunity. Okay. And not the outcome of that impunity. So if you look at it, that law and order is a must, and then we've said that everyone must bear their cross, because for this to happen, everyone in that whole chain is culpable, including the tenant. Because I'm sure at some point they were even aware, like my colleague has said, for the past 6 years, this thing has been on the cards. So if you are a discerning tenant, you may not want to come to this space. So really, everyone must bear their cross. And as a society, we have to be law-abiding.
Constant Cap, I'm a tenant, I'm a landowner. I know there have been issues around my property. Should I move today, in your view?
I think you should. If you're, when we look at this particular structure, and yesterday I shared 2 maps on my social media handle of this area in 2002 and this area as of December last year, and you could see clearly that the building was literally on top of the river.
So okay.
You actually see the change in the change in flow and how it actually covers up to the. And we've seen reports on social media of other buildings. I will not name them here, that are on top of rivers, that are right next to rivers. You know, that as Vice Chairman has said, at one point it becomes impunity. There's another level where maybe your building line is according to the 30 meters, and then you've put a wall. Your security wall is within that riparian area. That is a bit different, like we've seen at some of the demolitions in Kileleshwa.
Yes.
No, that's slightly different, and that can be discussed in, I guess, debated from another perspective. But where a building is put right on top of a river, I mean, there's someone who's built not far from here, right next to a dam. You know, I think we'll look at that a bit later on, to a point where whenever the building is painted, the paint peels off because of moisture. You know, there's a point that we get to where we're talking now impunity, and that's where now we have to ask ourselves, who issued that first planning brief for that developer? Who is the architect who came and designed a building that was going to be positioned there? Who are the public officials who gave those approvals?
Because someone in that chain must have known something.
Because not even someone.
All of them.
All of them must have known.
Yes.
By the time I come here and do a site plan of the area, I know there's a river passing here. And I'm misleading. I'm actually misleading
both of you the
investors.
uncomfortable questions. So can Nema and this interagency group carry out these demolitions without also doing self-introspection?
I think
both of you can come in on this.
That is necessary, because if you don't do that, then you expect more of this in future. Yeah, so the self-introspection is necessary, so that you can see where we went wrong. People can own up, and we correct our ways going forward.
Yeah. We have seen examples where, and we saw this reported about 2 months ago, where the DPP himself sort of opened a case about activities that had happened within his office. You know, would Nema have the capacity to sort of investigate its activities?
They should be. I mean, the fact that we've got to this point, it gets to a point where people are asking those questions, and it gets to a point where people, there has to be that form of you call it self-introspection, where we look and say, where have we got wrong such that we got here, and who are those people responsible, and those people have to be punished, such that when now you go to public office, when I go to look for my approvals at the Nema County office at Nyayo House or at the County of Nairobi, the officials know that, you know, because these are professionals working in those offices, and they have to abide to certain professional codes, as well as the consultants. They also have to abide to certain professional codes. Those doing the environmental impact assessment, those doing the building designs, those doing the planning briefs, they have to also abide to certain professional ethos for the sake of nation building, for the sake of the general dignity of human beings in the city. Because when we look at, you've mentioned the tenants, when we look at the impact it's had on tenants, the impact it's had on investors, you know, that it's almost catastrophic for some of these people. And somebody else is sitting in an office because he gave a stamp, and they are safe. They're not going to bear the brunt. He's going to get his salary. He's just received his salary at end of last month, and life is going to go on. We have to now move to that level where those people are actually questioned. Why did you perform this particular incompetent act within your professional realm? Okay.
Moving forward, what do we then expect to see in terms of a structure like this one? We know that Nema have said quite clearly they are going to bring a bill to the owner that they need to pay for the cost of the demolitions. But do we then expect Nema to come and sort of clean the river around here? Are they going to clear any sort of remaining debris? Because that's another question Kenyans are asking. What do you think should happen?
Yes, you see, there's a role for everyone in this. I believe when it comes to cleaning the river, one is not only Nema that should be involved, but many other agencies in government. And if you look at the river now, it's not only this building which is a problem. You can see even the color of the water is some other color, and even the smell from the water. So I think the cleaning exercise should be expanded beyond just the building. So I expect that to be taken, to be undertaken after the demolitions.
I don't have my iPad here to get some feedback, but someone has texted me asking for your comments on a building that our Enoch Sikolia in his report yesterday indicated was being constructed adjacent to this particular structure as well. What does that tell you? And we could see sort of the foundation had already been laid.
Well, I guess the warning may have been sent indirectly to the owner of that that particular building. But again, it goes down to what we're talking about earlier on. We have allowed impunity to a certain degree where people actually feel nothing. You know, when we have press reports on a particular building over a 3-year period of time, and the person goes and completes it, and people move in, I think the message should be very clear.
Okay.
That this has to stop. And we have to go back and ask ourselves who is giving those particular approvals. I just want to touch on the question that you asked just now on now what happens after, because this an interesting discussion came up within a placemaking network that we have among planners, architects, landscape architects and the likes on what do we do now with the riparian reserves after we've cleared them, and there are various ideas that came up, because generally the public are saying, okay, plant trees and leave it there. But this creates an opportunity for us to now make use of these riparian reserves as public spaces, as places for kids to play.
We're in dire need of public spaces in Nairobi.
Yes. Places for kids to play, places for families to meet. We could think now of how we can have public parks along the rivers within 30-meter radii along the rivers. And that will act as a way of protecting some of these rivers.
Okay.
Because if we just abandon them or leave it as idle land or build with our backyards towards them and block them out, then we end up where we are now.
Okay.
Because as we speak, most people they want clean rivers, but it's not really something that concerns people as passionately because they don't really make use of them.
Okay. Gentlemen, we are practically out of time, but I just want to get final thoughts from you on this. Nema say one of the things that has blocked their work is court cases. Now, judges have their own way in which they look at the evidence and sort of decide. But again, do you feel Nema needs to do more education, maybe with the judiciary, with ordinary Kenyans like you and I?
Yes, I'm of the school of thought that prevention is better than cure, and more public awareness should go hand in hand with this, so that we work towards more compliance and less enforcement.
Okay.
And the best example I normally give is KRA. KRA has been very successful over the recent years because of their approach of compliance as opposed to enforcement. So they approach you early and work with you so that you get to the right destination. You don't let things deviate so much and then now you come to enforce. Because what we are doing here now is enforcement. So if they change the approach so that they worked more towards compliance, so there'll be more workshops organized by them, more public awareness events organized by them, participation at all levels.
Participation at all levels, very important. Constant, my last question to you would be, there's talk of 4,000 buildings in Nairobi. Do you believe it's 4,000 buildings? Is it more? Is it less? Can they all be brought down?
I do believe that it could be up to 4,000 buildings because when you look at Nairobi, as we know, was a swampy area, and we've got lots of rivers flowing.
The fact that those who say major estates are actually sort of on water reserves.
And in particular, some of the areas that were rural areas of Nairobi, Dagoretti South area, Dagoretti North area, have a lot of construction along the rivers. And then towards this other side of town, moving towards industrial area, we have now more formal constructions along some of these rivers. So it could easily get to 4,000, maybe not 4,000 malls. Many of them could actually be much smaller structures like we saw in Kileleshwa, some of the buildings being brought down.
Or temporary structures.
I'm not sure whether all will be brought down. I can't really comment on that. But the fact that they've started with some of the major buildings is a critical area. Alongside this we have to have an improvement on the sewerage system, especially in some of the informal areas where these rivers pass through.
Okay.
And we have to also monitor some of the buildings that are letting sewer into.
Fair enough. Constant Cap, an urban planner, Gado Pio, Vice President, Architectural Association of Kenya. Thank you for joining me on this very impromptu set. We are literally adjacent to the road. and I needed to sort of get them comfortable before we could do this interview. Thank you, gentlemen, once again. You're watching Daybreak.
Thank you, Maura.
Stay tuned. After the break, Joy Muthengi and Chef Ali will be cooking up a storm, so to speak. And of course, keep the feedback going. They'll be reading your messages there as well. Use the hashtag Daybreak. If you have any questions or comments about the process that's happening here today, ongoing here today, and could happen in other parts of Nairobi and across the country, let us know. Stay tuned.